Okay, let's unpack this. We're doing a deep dive into the complex analysis of U.S. sovereign stability, looking at that really dramatic period from January through November of 2025.
And what's so fascinating is that the sources, they're very clear. This wasn't just, simple volatility.
Yeah.
They define this period as a systemic phase transition. The U.S. moved from a state of what they call latent instability at the start of the year,
Right.
right into advanced systemic instability by the end.
And to track that, the analysts used some pretty specific tools, the Sovereign Stability Assessment Framework, the SSAF, and the Narrative Dissonance Index.
The NDI, yeah.
But the whole thing kicks off with a paradox, doesn't it? This phase of deceptive calm in the first quarter. I mean, the S&P 500 actually broke 6,100.
It did. And that was all driven by what they call the policy put. This belief that policymakers will always step in to rescue asset prices.
Right.
That confidence, which was, completely engineered, created a market dissonance score of 75 out of 100.
So the market was happy, but the foundation was already weak.
Exactly. You still had sticky CPI inflation at 3.0%, and their policy and fiscal integrity score was already a worrying 80 out of 100. The risks were there. Latent.
So if the risks were already baked in, what was the trigger? What pushed the system into what they call kinetic acceleration? That's phase two.
It was this growing economic divergence, the K-shaped economy.
Ah, yes.
The capital markets were soaring, but for most people, the foundational economy was getting worse. The specific policy shock the analysts identified came in September 2025. That new wave of tariffs.
And that just snarled supply chains immediately.
Instantly.
Yeah.
And input costs for businesses shot up across the country.
And this wasn't just an economic stress, was it? The institutions themselves were under pressure, the Constitutional Unraveling Index. It started to track something they called programmatic instability.
Which is such a key phrase. This wasn't chaotic failure. The sources describe it as a systematic, almost planned degradation of government capacity, driven right from the executive branch.
And that degradation, that institutional hollowing, it really peaked in phase three, so October and November.
Absolutely. That's when we saw the aggressive implementation of Schedule F, which basically stripped civil service protections from thousands of nonpartisan workers.
Making the state incredibly brittle.
Very. And then you have the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, which orchestrated the mass termination of somewhere between 200,000 to 300,000 federal workers. It just crippled entire agencies.
And an institutional assault that big, it's going to get a social response. And it did. The No Kings II mass mobilization in October.
The numbers are just staggering. An estimated 5 to 8 million participants nationwide. That's not a protest. That is, as the sources say, a profound withdrawal of consent by the governed. And that friction, that tension, crossed what they call the kinetic threshold on September 28th. This is a critical date. Because that's when the sources document the direct deployment of military and federal agents into cities like Portland and Broadview, Illinois, specifically operating against local authorities.
So a total rupture in that federal-state cooperation.
A complete breakdown. A core failure.
So where did that leave the final scorecard? By November 27th, what was the final number?
The composite SSAF score hit 73 out of 100. That confirmed the classification. Advanced systemic instability.
73, wow.
But the metric that explains why it all felt so chaotic and sudden to people, that was the Narrative Dissonance Index, the NDI. It hit an unprecedented 9.1 out of 10.
An epistemic crisis, they called it?
An epistemic crisis. The official state narrative was this golden age, but it was completely decoupled from reality for most people.
Yeah.
66% of the public believed the country was on the wrong track.
And the economic data backed them up. The economic instability score was at 68, driven by, what was it, record household debt?
A record $18.59 trillion in household debt. Most families had zero cushion. And on top of that, a $1.8 trillion fiscal deficit.
So the conclusion across the sources is pretty stark.
It is. The metrics show that the very mechanisms of self-correction, professional, civil service, social trust, they've been systematically degraded. The analysis is that the U.S. isn't in a cyclical downturn. It's in a fundamentally unstable state.
And that instability has massive implications beyond just the U.S. The analysis points to something called the Western Systemic Cascade 2025-27, which predicts this internal chaos could lead to the unraveling of the entire transatlantic security architecture. It really makes you wonder, if the system that underpins global security begins to cannibalize its own capacity, what happens to the rest of the world that relies on it? Something to think about.